Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Trina Shinks, and I'm a professor at the University of Michigan School of Social Work. Welcome to our Engage virtual discussion. We've been having conversations all semester and really throughout the summer on equity issues. And I'd like to take a second to introduce the Engage team. I guess if we have the PowerPoint, Fatima, if you can add that up. And so our Engage team includes Sonia Harb, Aisha Edwin Ghazi, Fatima Salman, sorry, Fatima. And then we have two of our social work interns, Jamie Simmons and Blake Newman. Next slide. Note about accessibility. Oh, sorry, you can go back if you want. Note about accessibility. If you just hit closed captioning CC at the bottom, that'll activate captions if you want to see the words in real time. And if you want to just see the speaker speaking as opposed to everyone, you can toggle between gallery and speaker view and just see the PowerPoint who's talking. And this session is eligible for continuing education units. So I'm going to pass it to Leah to say a few words about how that works. Leah?
Hello, everyone. Thanks, Trina. So in order to receive CE for today, if you would like it, we do need you to stay for the duration of the session. So please do that. This session, because we have a wonderful range of presenters, we actually are offering a post-test so that we can have as organic a discussion as possible. So we've had some questions about how to succeed at the post-test, and really we're designing the questions with the intention that you should be able to pass it if you're attentive to the session today. So if you would like to take notes, you're welcome. That's not necessarily a requirement, but that's the level at which we're expecting you to pay attention to be successful on the post-test. And then after the post-test goes out, that's usually a business day or two after the session, we will include information about when you can expect to receive the evaluation that you will need to complete in order to get your certificate. Okay, so stay for the whole time. Watch for the post-test, and then after the post-test, you will receive the evaluation. So if there's any questions about anything related to CE, I'm going to be available. I'll be watching the chat today. You're welcome to contact me there. And I will also be putting the contact email for our office in case there are any further questions about this. So without further ado, I'm going to pass it back to the Engage team.
Thank you, Aaliyah. And so this is our last virtual conversation of the semester. But if you go to our webpage at this website link here, you can look at past sessions and look at some of the notes and some of the videos from our past discussions. But today, next slide, this session is being done in partnership with CASC. So we have Dr. Katie Richard-Schuster and Amber Williams, who are joining us today, and they'll help us think about multi-level critical structural analysis and how we move from analysis to action in a way that gets at root causes of issues. And so this session will be featuring some of the CASC alum, so our Community Action and Social Change minor alumni and contacts of the school who are doing work around racial equity in Washtenaw County. So sometimes we've been focused on Detroit, but now we're close to home, right in Washtenaw County where the School of Social Work is located. And so now I'm going to pass it on to our facilitator, Aisha Ghazi Edwin, to introduce our other guests. Aisha?
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much, Trina. Fatima, if you could go to the next slide. And it is my pleasure to welcome our guests today. We have Ashley Kryscynski, the Communications and Public Relations Specialist of Washtenaw Intermediate School District. We have Justin Hodge, who's a Clinical Assistant Professor and Washtenaw County Commissioner. Congrats, Justin. And Felicia Brayback, who's a CASC alum, psychologist, and former Washtenaw County Commissioner. So, as Trina said, we have CASC alum with us, we have social workers with us, and what we really want to do in this session is also talk about how do social work values and skills, how are they used when we actually work in communities to fight some equity issues or inequity issues like racism. So I also want to make a note that this session is meant to be interactive. So if you as an audience member have something to say, please put it in the chat. We will unmute you. We want this to be more discussion based. And now I'm going to give our amazing panelists a few minutes, let's say 5 minutes each. And if you can each just introduce yourselves, say what you do in Washtenaw County, and how maybe you see inequity, racial inequity, affect its residents. So Ashley, why don't we start with you?
Sure. Hi, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Ashley Kryscynski. As Aisha said, I am the Communications and Public Relations Specialist at the Washtenaw Intermediate School District. I am a 2011 CASC alum, actually from the first graduating class, as well as I finished my MSW in community organizing with a concentration on children and youth and families, and a minor in social policy and evaluation from U of M in 2014. I can't believe it's been 6 years already. My background is in community organizing prior to my communications work. I managed and coordinated 2 community collaboratives. One is WACY, the Washtenaw Alliance for Children and Youth, where we worked to coordinate partnerships and actions around high school graduation rates and physical and emotional safety for children and youth in our K-12 system. And then the other piece of my work was with Washtenaw Futures, our college access network around post-secondary access and attainment in Washtenaw County. And so I'm really excited to be here. There are a lot of inequities within our community. I think we often find Washtenaw County and the Ann Arbor area at the top of all of the #1 lists for education and quality of life and access to healthcare. But when we really start to dig through some of those layers, we find that that is not the case for everyone in our community. And so I'm really excited to be here. We see how COVID has exacerbated a lot of these inequities. And so this is a really important and timely conversation. I'm excited to be here. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Ashley. And also, we see Washtenaw County at the top of some of the lists in regards to being one of the most racially and socioeconomically segregated counties in the nation, which we'll talk more about. Justin, you want to go ahead?
Sure. All right, everybody, I'm Justin Hodge. I'm a clinical assistant professor here at the University of Michigan School of Social Work. I'm also Washtenaw County Commissioner-elect. So just to be clear, I'm not commissioner yet. That won't be until January. Commissioner Braybeck will still be commissioner until then, and then she'll be state representative, Braybeck. So that's very exciting for all of us and social work to have her in the state legislature. So tell you a little bit about what I do in Washtenaw County. Before I become county commissioner, I've been doing a lot of work with the county. So I serve on our community action board, which is focused on addressing economic inequality in Washtenaw County. So as Aisha just said, Washtenaw County is one of the most economically segregated regions in the entire country. And a lot of the concentrated poverty in Washtenaw County is in my district, where I'll represent. So I'll represent District 5 on the Washtenaw County Commissioner starting in January, which is most of Ypsilanti Township and all of Augusta Township. As Ashley mentioned too, we've seen COVID-19's disproportionate impact on people of lower socioeconomic status and people of color. And my district has been particularly hit hard by that. The zip codes 48197, 48198, if you've been looking at any of the health department statistics, those are in my district and my neighborhood as well. So I'm in the part of the county that's been hardest hit by the pandemic and a lot of the equity issues that we see in the county. Plenty of health inequities that we've seen over here before the pandemic, and the pandemic has just exacerbated things. A lot of my campaign when I was running for commissioner was focused on addressing these health, wealth, and safety inequities that we have across the county, but a lot of it is racial inequity, and it's focused in my area. So really excited to be part of this conversation. In terms of what I do at the school, really focused on getting more social workers to engage in policy and political work. So if you're in the policy and political social work pathway, you know that I'm one of the pathway leads. So design some of the classes in that pathway, and really excited to get more, come up here a year or two from now and have many of you that are students right now, hopefully will have taken the pathway and will run for office and be successful in giving, participating in panels like this. So, I mean, that's enough for now. I think everything else will come out in the discussion.
Thanks so much, Justin. And I want to say congrats to State Rep Felicia Brayback. Would you like to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Sure, happy to be here and to join my colleagues Justin and Ashley. So it's great to see everybody. And so the roles that I get to play in the community, although I would be honored to be a CASC alumni and would to be an official one. I can't claim that officially, but I am a county commissioner right now, as Commissioner-elect Hodge just talked about. And so getting to do that work right now around racial equity. And I am also by trade, I have my MSW with focus in clinical. and clinical work. And I also have my doctorate in clinical psych, and have been practicing therapy with folks for 25 years now, which is always so weird because I always have to do that math in my head because I don't feel that old. But when I say that out loud, it feels like I'm like, oh, geez, that's a long time. So I love doing therapy with folks. I feel like it is such an incredible gift, and just have thoroughly enjoyed the time that I've been able to spend with clients and doing that work. And the work that I feel like we get to do clinically impacts the work that we get to do policy wise, and vice versa. And so they're really interchangeable and so important to understand on both levels, I believe, to really be effective. And so, like I said, the thing that brought me here was I did my postdoc at U of M, and then at CAPS, and then became a staff member at CAPS, and then decided to start my private practice here in Ann Arbor. And so had been doing that for a long time, and then got asked to if I had any interest in public service, and so decided to give it a shot and have loved it. I've been a county commissioner since 2011, and in 2 weeks that will be my last meeting. So lots of starting the goodbyes right now in terms of my formal relationship as a commissioner with folks, and moving on to hopefully continue and do the best work that we can at the state. It is going to be a tougher lift. We are hoping to be able, I'm a Democrat, we're hoping to be able to win the majority, to be able to push some of these policies forward into statute, and that's going to be harder now. But I just had a conversation earlier this week with one of my main partners in our racial equity work at the county about what kinds of things we could push at the state. So already having those conversations, hoping to be able to take the work that we've done here at the county to the state, and I'm looking forward to listening to folks and continuing our conversation with people. And I'm grateful to be here. And I do apologize that I'm going to be leaving at 1 because I have a client to meet with. So I apologize that I can't be here for the whole time.
Okay, that's okay. And thank you so much for joining us. And I'm so happy that we have 2 elected officials with us. And, Justin, you've talked about this before, but just the power and the need to get involved in local policy issues and how impactful it can be when, you can connect those issues and change policy at the state level. What I find really interesting about all 3 of you, just right off the bat, is all of you seem like you have some background in micro practice, but you're all doing macro work. And can you talk a little bit about what are some of the skills and tools in micro practice that you see translatable and helpful in working in macro issues? How are the 2 connected?
I will start by saying I have 0 background in micro practice aside from the intro course that we took during our MSW program. But I think it's really important to note that, we talk about this dichotomy between micro and macro practice. And to be honest, there really isn't. Those lines are far blurrier than I think is discussed during your education. Everything that we do, whether it's micro or macro, is based on relationships, right? And trust and dignity and worth of each person that we come in contact with. And so you can't do that as a community organizer or as a clinician or as a policymaker without really understanding that there really isn't as big of a difference between micro and macro practices as is often, said.
Yeah, that's so true.
All right, I'll jump in. So I'm not doing micro work right now, but prior to having this role at the university, almost all of my professional experience had been in micro practice. So I used to do case management for kids and adults with developmental disabilities for a community mental health system. Also there, I was doing child and family therapy, home-based child and family therapy. So I would meet with kids and families either at their homes or at a school or McDonald's, do therapy there. Then I moved on to doing work, crisis intervention work with suicidal teens And all of that was when I was with a community mental health system, and working there at that level of government is really what pushed me to get more involved in policy and political work. So I was working during the time when Governor Snyder and the Republican legislature slashed the budget to the CMH system. And the CMH system across, I mean, we're still struggling right now across the state because those budget cuts haven't been reversed, hoping Representative Braybeck could be able to do something about that. But the impact of that was, at our CMH, if you didn't have Medicaid, we had to discharge you. And frequently it had to be done so quickly that there wasn't a clear transition plan that we were able to come up with. And then taking a look at the people that tend to hold elected office, how they tend not to be people that have any sort of background in social work or any kind of, focusing on anything other than law and business, compelled me to get more involved. After that, I went on to work at Michigan Medicine, and I coordinated a couple of clinics there for kids in crisis, and then continued seeing my own clients there. So I think that my background in clinical social work has made my approach to policy work much more effective, because you get to see how policies impact people on a day-to-day life. It's not, you don't have to read about it. You see what the impact is. Like when I was working at CMH and had to have conversations with clients about how we have to terminate service, and that was really tough. And it's not something that anybody should have to deal with. And that's why we need to have better policymakers. So that's not something that ever happens to anyone.
Right.
I will just add on to that and echo both what Ashley and Justin said. The first thing when you asked that question, I thought relationships, right? Like that's the key, right? Like in all of it. And Ashley was really talking about that, and I feel like no matter what we're doing in life, that is the foundation. And so that's to me the biggest link. But I also really agree with Justin in that, the things that I get to learn about in policy, like I said before, like I can bring into the room when I get to work with clients and vice versa. And being a part right now, I am on I've been on the community mental health board here in Washtenaw County, I think for 8 years. I can't remember. And have witnessed cuts and cuts and more cuts. And it is, it's egregious to watch, and legislators, I believe, are so out of touch with what it actually takes to be able to allow folks access to the services that they should have access to and legally should have access to. But I will also tell you this, there are 110 state representatives. I will be the only mental health care practitioner out of that 110. That makes a difference.
Wow.
Right? When we're talking about healthcare and equity and issues like this that we all care about, I do know that one voice can shift policy. I've seen it at the county, so I've watched that happen, and I am not a shrinking violet, and so I don't anticipate that I will not have a shrinking voice at the state either. And again, was already having a conversation this week about how I want to try and push both our public and private mental health systems to be much more accessible and robust, because they have changed so drastically in the past 2 decades in terms of what we are able to provide to our clients and consumers, that it's simply egregious. And so we need to be able to use what we learn in both arenas to make things better for those who we get to serve.
Yeah, that's great. And I really appreciate that both of you all 3 of you have raised the point about you really can't fully understand a person's problem until you understand kind of the policy, the community arena in which they exist, as well as what they're going through individually, right? You guys talked a little bit about mental health and mental care access. Can you also talk about what are some other really pressing racial inequity issues that you see affecting your community? And how is it affecting their well-being? How do you think it's going to impact their future?
You want to go? Go ahead.
Sure, I'll start. So, I mean, some of you talked a little bit about this. I showed the grave inequities, and I think Justin, you touched on it too. I mean, we know things like here in Washtenaw County, that a Black man can live on the east side of the county, where Justin is going to be representing, can live 10 years less than his white counterpart on the west side, 16 years for the Latinx community. Students in our schools again, on the east side can get test score points on average that are 30 to 40 points less than those on the west side. It's not because these kids over here are smarter. Like that's, that's not what's happening. We know in terms of economic development and access to small business loans. I mean, there are so many places, housing. I mean, it's like you name the social construct, like there's inequity.
Yeah.
And even though there are so many accolades that our county gets for different things, it's easy, and if you just look at those, it's easy to overlook the tremendous disparities. And I think sometimes, and I can remember saying this in a meeting with folks, that it is really hard when you are wed to this notion that your community is so great and so progressive,
Yes.
to actually take a look at it and to look at the things that are really painful and the truth about your community. And what was fascinating was in that moment, in that meeting, I said that everybody was silent. And I was like, no one's gonna back me up on this. And what was interesting and also very telling, I thought, about the work that we have still to do and are continuing to do as our community, is that afterwards in the break, a number of people came up to me and said, "You're so right, Felicia. I'm so glad you said that." But that fear of being able to even talk about it is part of what keeps us stuck. So lots to do.
Lots to do.
And so to add on to that, thinking about other sorts of inequities, particularly in Eastern Washtenaw, since that's where a lot of my attention is going to be at, we have a lot of areas that are in a food swamp or a food desert. From where I live, the closest grocery store is a 10 to 15-minute drive. For people that don't have access to reliable transportation, it makes it really challenging to get to the grocery store. We don't have strong public transit, and we certainly don't have regional transit. That makes it even more challenging for people. And then access to healthcare. I mean, you maybe would have insurance, but where are the places where you could go to get care? I mean, we need to look at where these are throughout the county and really map them out. One of the things that I'm really focused on, Trina might jump in around some of this economic development work, or but the children's savings accounts, we'll talk more about that later, but addressing predatory lending. So predatory lending tends to target people of lower socioeconomic status and keeps people in a cycle of debt. And it's no surprise where places that predatory lending practices are located. There's going to be a lot of them in Eastern Washtenaw. There's some in Western Washtenaw, or people will drive to go to those locations. So it's hard to build wealth when you get trapped in some of those cycles of poverty. And we see that traditional financial services tend not to be located in those areas as well. So people that want to have a bank account or a checking or a credit union account or a bank account are going to have to make a bigger drive for that. But then there's a transportation problem. So we need to look at where we're investing our funds and make sure that people have opportunity to be able to be healthy, to have access to those foods and resources and healthcare.
I feel like this panel is going to be a lot of everything the other panelists said, and because between Felicia, Justin, and I think we're pretty deeply entrenched into a lot of these issues within our community, and they really are so multifaceted and intertwined, right? Everything Felicia and Justin said around transportation and banking and housing and food insecurity, and education, it's all so deeply rooted and intertwined together that tackling one issue is really incredibly difficult. So from my side, the only thing I would add, in addition to what they've already said, is from a school perspective, we have incredibly inequitable education systems, right? They were built that way. They were built in a way that were only for privileged white students, right, to be frank. And how our education system is built was not in a way that supports students of color, students with disabilities, students in poverty, students from rural communities. And so again, COVID is really exacerbating a lot of this inequity, right? We have about 57% of students right here in Washtenaw County who don't have access to high-speed broadband internet. And we talk about being one of the best communities, best counties for everything, right, Felicia? And when you have almost 60% of your students in your community who can't access Google Classrooms or Zoom on a daily basis to do their education, that's a real issue, right? And that is further widening those education gaps. We also talk about inequitable funding, at our local level for how schools are funded, right? Ann Arbor Public Schools gets the biggest piece of the pie when it comes to per pupil education funding compared to a district like Ypsilanti Community Schools or Lincoln. We also know that children of color are more disproportionately impacted by special education and who has access to high quality special education. And so really, as we talk about all of these issues, access to a job, access to transportation, access to financial institutions and housing, all of that is woven up into education as well, and who has access to education in our community.
Right.
I want to add on to what Ashley said, since that's the theme, and just point out that the education, the access to high-speed internet to engage in education isn't just something limited to K through 12. I mean, there are students in our school that, because of the pandemic and us not being in the building, you can be in the building right now, but well, no, we can't do that now. But when we were able to still be in the building, even though we weren't having in-person classes, there were students in Western Washtenaw and other parts where they didn't have access to internet, and they would have to drive to try to connect to class via Zoom in the parking lot of a library, if that were an option. So this is something that also is affecting undergrad and graduate education. And I mean, to people that are students that are watching this, your peers.
And I'd add too, right, the privilege of being able to work from home, which many of us on this call are doing right now. When we talk about, again, inequity in education, who has access to education impacts who has access to jobs, who has access to jobs you can work from home during a global pandemic. And all of that is intertwined.
I will also add to Ashley's point about broadband and the shocking amount of folks who don't have access in our county, because most people don't realize that, is that then there's a secondary issue. And that secondary issue is that even if folks have access, it's so expensive that they can't, some folks can't afford that. And so then it's even more that's challenging as well. And so there are two huge issues around broadband that we have here in our community. At the county level, we're really trying to tackle the former, knowing that the latter exists, and that that's kind of the next big hurdle to tackle. But there are two huge problems that we have when we're looking at that.
Yeah, you guys have touched on so many different issues, and actually, I have a class I'm a member of the Human Rights Commission of Ann Arbor, so I don't speak on behalf of the entire county, but they are one of the topics that they've taken on at the request of the commission is internet access. And it's shocking because of the housing prices, how many people have to live or do live in Ypsi, and then the lack of internet access in Ypsi, and how many people are trying to drive to mobile hotspots or collecting around libraries and trying to tap into their internet, and how much more difficult that will become as it gets colder outside. It's a huge issue that definitely affects equitable outcomes in education and access to information. And I think now in this age to healthcare, so much of our healthcare is being done online. So that's such an important issue. Actually, I wanted to ask you guys, do you know anything about the Washtenaw Broadband Task Force, the Internet Task Force? Felicia, you're smiling, so I'm sure that you know a bit about them.
So the task force was developed from the commissioners, and knowing that, so we really started looking at this issue maybe 5 years ago. And the task force, actually, we just had a report out maybe a month ago, and we've made some real headway because what the task force did was a huge undertaking in terms of doing a survey countywide. And the data that they have gotten from that survey is much more particular in terms of the detail that it offers, in terms of who has access to internet and who doesn't. Part of the problem with being able to get funding to fix the infrastructure, to be able to increase access, is that the maps that are drawn now and are utilized, if one person on a block has access to internet, then it's considered that everybody does. You know, and so that's a problem.
Right.
Right. Like, and so what happened was the survey that the task force undertook looked household by household, parcel by parcel.
Wow.
And so now we have a much more detailed map, so that now we're able to, as a county, and then work with our state officials to go, you know, like when there are, for example, any sort of grants that are available. I mean, we're gonna have to look for money. I mean, the number, you know, like this project is, you know, going to cost lots and lots of money. I can't remember how many millions of dollars it's going to be, but you know, if we can put together kind of, you know, grants in terms of maybe pulling things from the federal level to be able to do that, you know, we'll have a better sense. And the biggest step, one of the biggest steps in doing that was being able to show a map of need. And now we have that. So we have made a huge leap forward because of the task force and all their diligence. I mean, we even have you know, communities here in our county who have done special millages to be able to get access to broadband so that the community could have them. But a lot of communities can't afford that,
Right.
because it's so expensive. And so I really feel like, you know, we at the county and then working with the state need to figure out ways to be able to offer that for our residents.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'd love to give a shout out to Ypsilanti Community Schools right here on this forum, because pretty quickly on in the pandemic, when we as schools moved to all virtual, you know, schools and businesses were buying up technology like hotcakes, right? iPads, computers, hotspots, everything people could get their hands on, as we all needed to make this shift. And Ypsilanti Schools stepped up to the plate to broker a partnership with Comcast to ensure that all of their students, whether they are enrolled or in YCS or not, but they just had to live within the boundaries of their district, right? We have a pretty significant school of choice community. And so they stepped up and made sure that every student who lived within their boundaries had access to internet for free or for low cost through this partnership. And that is something that, you know, we as schools, we shouldn't, it's amazing that they did it, but we shouldn't have to be doing things like that. There's a question about food access. We know that there's thousands, tens of thousands of kids in our community who are missing out on free meals at their schools, right? And this is another thing that we as schools are always put to the test for and responsible for, is to fill a lot of those holes in our social safety nets, whether that's access to technology during a pandemic or access to food during the school days. Our schools have been doing really tremendous work with food deliveries and food drop-offs and pickups to make sure that our most vulnerable students and families have access to the things that they need just to survive, right? Let alone trying to learn during the pandemic, but just to make sure that our kids and families have what they need to survive.
Right. And I want to just drop back a little bit to racial inequity, right? So, I mean, there might be some of you on the call who are thinking, what does this have to do with race? But I want to be clear. I want to make the connection that, you know, a lot of the things that we're talking about in terms of access to internet access or food deserts, school systems, these issues were strategically created through policy, specifically housing policy. You had maps that were redlined that Black people did not have access to. And then they didn't have access to areas with a higher tax base, with better schools. Grocery stores moved away, jobs moved out. So it became this domino effect that has created this kind of systemic, you know, issue of just multiple conditions that predominantly affects Black communities. You know, I can talk a little bit about in Ann Arbor. I know that there is the average income here is around like 95,000, which I think is grossly misrepresented because there's many people that have a very, very high income, right? But there's also like a 27% rate of poverty here that isn't discussed. The majority of those individuals are Black or Asian American. Can you talk a little bit about poverty and race in the county and what that looks like?
I said, so the county has an excellent tool, the Opportunity Index, and they're going to be relevant. Felicia's like, oh yeah, the Opportunity Index is great. So if you take a look at the Opportunity Index, you can map on a lot of these different things that we've talked about. So you can look at opportunity by race and ethnicity and what educational attainment looks like. All of these different things that we've been talking about, you can put them on this map and look and see how they overlap. So as we're talking about these various inequities across the county, they do map onto racial inequities. So when you look at how population is dispersed throughout the county, and demographically, it's not a coincidence. Like, it's not a coincidence that COVID-19 has hit my district and the zip codes in my district harder, and that those tend to be where there are a lot of people of color. Those inequities go hand in hand. Oh, they just posted a link to the opportunity index in the link.
Ashley's on it.
Yeah.
Thank you, Ashley. And we will be sending out an email after this to all participants with a list of resources that were shared.
I will also add that, when we were looking at the equity work that I got to be a part of at the county, 6-7 years ago, and we were looking at disparities that we're recognizing throughout the county, and not being able to move the needle in the way that we wanted to. Lots of folks were doing lots of things, not only in the county, but we have, this tremendous nonprofit system in our community as well. And so there are lots of folks who are rowing and trying to do things for others. But again, it wasn't getting us where we wanted to. And when we kind of layered on to the inequities, different factors, it was race where we saw the greatest. And so that's why we started in our endeavor, or shifted, I should say, not started, excuse me. We really shifted our focus to be on racial equity, knowing that there's this whole sentiment called targeted universalism, where we're really saying, okay, we're going to focus on this, knowing that there's all this intersectionality, and we need to attend to that. Right. But we're going to start here, because here's where we see the greatest impact and need. And that's not to say that there's an incredible resiliency and strength in those communities as well, but also trying to be able to be responsive, particularly when we look at the job that I believe that county government has, which is to be the safety net service for our residents.
I got to jump in there and say that I know there are some students from my policy analysis class watching this, and they had to have perked up when Felicia talked about target universalism, because that's one of the things that I teach on in that class. I really wish I could serve on the commission with you, Felicia, but I'm glad there's not this overlap. I mean, you can pass the baton, and I can continue pushing the racial equity work you've been doing. Would have been great to be on there at the same time, though.
Well, I'm planning to do that, Justin. Have the very last resolution that I'm offering at my last meeting about parental leave, which is also an equity issue, and so I am happy to leave that in capable hands to make sure that indeed happens. It's something that we have worked on for a long time, and we need people who are, again, at the table. So for all of you who are out there are interested in this work, we need these voices at the table. Otherwise, it doesn't happen. It simply does not happen, because it is an uphill battle, and the status quo will win out if we don't. Yeah.
And can I just raise up for 1 second, like, how proud I am to see social workers in these positions. And it shows, like, the social work values are embedded in the work you do. I mean, the fact, Felicia, that you're talking about intersectionality, right? And you're talking about equity and how it affects multiple marginalized populations. I mean, I think that's the advantage that social workers have if they ever want to run for public office or serve in a macro level, position, is that we have some of that education and background. Our profession teaches us to think about how things affect people at various levels with various intersecting identities, and may face compounded marginalization because of it. So I wanted to allow someone to ask a question. It was Kisa Johnson, I believe, who put it in the Q&A. So Kisa, you can go ahead and unmute yourself.
Trying to find oh, hey, can you guys hear me? I'm sorry.
Yep, we can hear you.
I have a lot of screens open, sorry. But yeah, I think she addressed my question, because I'm so glad you shared that index to me, and I'm loving everything that you guys are saying. My question, I believe she answered when it was talking about food access, because of despair, like, all these systems are so wicked. They're wicked problems, and they all interconnect with everything. And I'm here to study about food equity and access in food systems, and I just see the inequities of the redlining, the prison rates, the education. I really want to know what is Washtenaw County doing about food and providing that food access. And if you guys have any insights into that.
I'm happy to start and start the conversation and add to what Ashley said. I alluded to, well, at first, Ashley talked about some of what our school systems are doing, but also I have the honor of being on the part of one of our nonprofits and being on serving on that board, and that's Food Gatherers, and so I think I've done that, I don't know, 7 years maybe. But the place where we are now with the pandemic, again, is highlighting some of the greatest needs. And, we know that the majority of households are only a paycheck away from bankruptcy, right? We know that. And that is really bearing out, unfortunately, with the impact of the pandemic. It's not only health care and access to health care, but just basic stability and our basic needs. And so I know, for example, with Food Gatherers, one of the things that we tried to do was really partner both with school systems, but also our pantries, not only with the ones that we had established, but ones that were popping up in communities. Really trying to partner with them. And I know in the months earlier, we haven't gotten a report recently, but in the earlier months of the pandemic through the summer, Food Gatherers was delivering 100,000 pounds of food more than it usually does, to be able to push out to our community members. And so although there is that need right now, I think that there is the bigger issue that Justin was alluding to is like, how are we going to strategically and systemically really handle this and not be reactive to, okay, we have a pandemic and then there's a need right now, but what are we going to do in terms of the very real problem when folks have to drive or take inadequate public transportation 10 or 15 minutes away to be able to have access to food. And the other thing that we know is that when you go into a grocery store in our Black and brown neighborhoods, and if you look at the produce quality is very different in those stores compared to other stores in white counterparts. And so, it's not only the availability, but it's also the quality of food. And so I think that those are continued places where we need to push.
I think the only other thing I'd add from our school side is that, so we at the ISD manage special education programs and dietary needs for a lot of our medically fragile students, are students who are very often, forgotten, unfortunately, especially in a time like this pandemic. So one of our programs is serving students who have severe and multiple disabilities. A lot of them are medically fragile. A lot of them need feeding tubes or trachs. And so one gap that we have been filling is that we are doing food delivery directly to these families because they're kids in wheelchairs or kids, whose families can't leave them to go and pick up groceries or something. And so we've been making sure that they have access, again, to food that is meeting their specific needs that you just can't go to a grocery store, even if you do have access to. And so making sure that really, again, we're trying to fill all the gaps at a time and within systems that were not designed to fill gaps by any means.
And, just to try to put this in perspective for many students, this is all the reason why you should be involved in this kind of work. It makes me think about, Felicia mentioned something I just talked about in class not that long ago. And then thinking about last week in my 504 class, for if any of you students are in here, we just talked about food justice and accessibility during the pandemic and what that looks like. So these are all things that you have training on. We're talking about this stuff in social work. And these are the things that we need our elected officials to be thinking about and doing work around. So you should be thinking about running for office shortly after you graduate, or like as you're about to graduate.
And not just elected office. Yes, run for elected office because we definitely need more social workers in the way that we think about issues in policy positions, but in any organization you're a part of. I'm the communications and public relations specialist for our district, but I sit on our executive team and I work hand in hand with our early childhood staff, our special ed staff, our community and school partnership staff to bring a unique perspective that my colleagues whose backgrounds are from the education education field don't always have or get, right? And so we as social workers always have a place at the table, and we should be making our voices known because of our unique training and how we view the world.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that social workers in positions of power can do amazing things and have the power to bring everyone to the table. I want to give Megan Perigord a chance to ask her question that you just put in the Q&A. So just a few seconds and we're going to unmute you and then you can go ahead and ask it. Hi, Megan. Oh, I think we may have lost her.
Nope, I've got it. Sorry.
Oh, okay.
Awesome. So what I asked was, in discussing inequities within public service sectors, specifically education and social services, is there a space in the discussion to talk about the inequities in pay and resources for social workers in the field? If we were to standardize pay and resources for agencies, could we then increase accessibility to consumers? What are the panelists' thoughts about unionization of social workers to create that standardization nationally?
Good one.
That's a good question. Yeah, I mean, I think it's a pretty serious issue that we don't have many, if any, social work focused unions. If you look back at the history of unions and social work, you see that they are very deeply connected, and that's not something that I think many social workers now think about or know much about. So I think there would be a lot of value in social workers figuring out how they unionize. I know there was a couple of years back, I think at St. Joe's, there was a group of social workers thinking about and working through potentially trying to form a union. I don't think that eventually panned out because there's always challenges when you're trying to challenge the status quo. But yes, to that, to the question of, I think, and you could do it. You could start trying to organize some social workers to form a union, but I think that would be really important.
The other thing that I would add is, yes, I mean, I think that it absolutely needs to be not only a conversation that we're elevating and talking about, but one that we need folks connected to our regulatory boards pushing. So that's one of the places that we really need to do a lot of work. And there's a huge hierarchy in terms of our fields and related fields. And then not only hierarchy, but desire to be able to kind of have ownership over certain titles and what that then means. And I feel like there's a long history that then goes through that and accompanies that. And so I feel like there's a lot of work that we can do, both in terms of pay, but also allowing folks to be able to provide service. And the thing that I was have said to folks when they are getting into this kind of territory battle is that there is so much work to go around. It's not clear to me why we're fighting about this. There's so much need and so much and we're not nearly at capacity, but there are so many of us who, at least on the clinical side, are full and have such a long waiting list, right? Like this is not, and so when I hear people really fighting to retain, certain titles, I think that we're kind of missing the big picture. I understand that there's a balance to be had, and I understand all of that, but I think that this is all also connected to pay and recognition of what folks bring to the work that they get to do with other people.
I have nothing else to add, but other than obviously full support for that. I think, we get into this profession because we want to see change for the better for everyone, right? In a racially equitable way for our communities that we live and work in. And that recognition is so important. And again, we can't do that without ensuring that we have social worker voices at the tables that matter.
Such great points. And I think as a profession, just the importance of advocating for ourselves, right? I mean, I think that we are often generalized and stereotyped as being one type of service. And I think it's also connected to some gendered stereotypes now, and it's devalued, right? Doing work with people and caring for others is devalued. It's important that we advocate for ourselves. and get in positions of power. But even if it's not a position of leadership, just knowing how important your presence is because of the values you've been taught. I want to give Rebecca, I'm so sorry, Rebecca, I can't see your last name the way that it shows, but it's Rebecca, I believe the last initial is S, a chance to talk. You had your hand up? I believe it's Schreberg, Rebecca Schreberg.
Yeah, you know what? I apologize. I had accidentally pressed that and I just noticed it.
Oh,
so
okay.
I apologize.
That's okay. I felt
Sorry.
bad because I saw your hand there for a
It was
while.
embarrassing. Sorry.
No, that's okay. Well, Lisa Greco has a really interesting question that she put in the chat. And I'm going to ask that we unmute Lisa in a second, but before, and this is about racism and how it shows up in our juvenile justice system. Before we transition to that, I want you guys to talk a little bit about something that I just found out as a commissioner is really important. I didn't just find out, but we have a subcommittee on the Crew report that was recently released, and the fact that Black men in the county are 30 times more likely to be convicted of a felony, 30 times. Can you guys talk a little bit about that?
So when you just said, can you talk about it? Part of me was just like, there's so much to say and I don't even know where to begin.
Right.
This is something that, that some of us suspected, was happening. It took the citizen group doing it to have, the bandwidth, and that shouldn't be the case either, right? Like that's partly why we worked to push for the racial equity policy, was to be able to look at these systems, and so I'm so grateful, for the leadership of, so many people who are on that committee, including Alma Wheeler-Smith, and, for being able to give us the data, right? And I think that it allows then folks, again, who are in different positions, like not only convicted, but charged, right? Like the number of folks who are charged with things and the different ways that decision-making process happens is meaningful, right? And so we now have, we have a prosecutor who will be new, who's coming in, and there have been lots of calls for that process to be challenged, and for there to be different and more considerations in terms of that process and more clarity and transparency around it, frankly, as well. And so I think that I'm, like I said, in terms of what I think about the report, I think unfortunately, it was not surprising. I think it's egregious. And I think that now, even more so, I feel like we had a responsibility before to push back against that. For those people who need data, I'm a very qualitative person, so I don't need a lot of quantitative stuff. But for people who do need that, we now have that. So there's no more hiding behind, well, that was just one person, that was just one example, that's not everywhere. Like, we can't do that anymore. And so I'm hoping that this will light a fire under, all the folks who are even closer to those decision-making places to be able to do it differently.
Right. Absolutely.
And it looks like the county is going to be taking some steps to try to address that. So last night you voted to reinstate the Criminal Justice Collaborative Council as a first step in that. And it sounds like there's a lot more that's going to be coming in the years ahead around that. I mean, it's really just impressive. And it goes to show the kind of impact residents can have on policymaking, because the people that developed the Crew report, they're just people that were concerned, saw a problem in the community, got together, got a statistician, and then put together this really powerful report that's going to get elected officials to make some moves.
Yeah, that's amazing. And it just shows
going back to again, all of these issues are so tightly woven together. One, thank you, Lisa. I love Lisa. Lisa was one of the site supervisors when I was doing my internship for my MSW. So it's so wonderful to see you here today. We, from the school side, right, the data that is in that report doesn't start with the criminal justice system. It starts very often in our schools. And so how are we as school leaders and teachers, as educators, working to combat the school to prison pipeline? We have stories of preschoolers and kindergartners being suspended for behaviors that they should not be suspended or even considered being suspended for. And so we have done a lot of work from the school side. We have a training called the Justice Leaders, where our educators and our school board members and administrators all across the county have been engaging in for probably the last 6 or 7 years, building, again, the educator muscle around intersectionality and social justice and racial equity, because these things that we consider bread and butter for social workers are not the same in other industries and other professions, and especially in education. So ensuring that our educators have the tools that they need to be more self-aware of how they are either feeding into a system unconsciously or how they have the power to break those cycles is really important from an educator as well as a board member as policymaker level. And so we have been running a lot of those sessions over the last few years. And we continue to go deeper and deeper to build the capacity of our educators to be leaders within their own districts and across other districts. We just had a number of new Board of Education members voted in earlier this month, and a number of them are teachers currently themselves, and making sure, again, that they have, similar to social workers, a voice at the table is so important in breaking that cycle as well. So, and I also would love to thank Lisa for the incredible work and partnership that she seeded at the Washtenaw County Youth Center. We have a very strong partnership from the ISD with them for our court-involved youth system, as well as our adult jail education program for young people up to age 26 with disabilities who are incarcerated, to ensure that they have access to education to make the change in their lives, that they can get out of some of these cycles that are just so actively working against them.
That's great. And Lisa, we're gonna go ahead and unmute you. And if you'd like to expand on your question or talk a little bit about some of the, racial inequity work that you're involved in Washtenaw County, that would be great.
Well, first of all, thanks and hi to all of my favorite people that are here. I miss you all. I'm happy to be in a new little domain, but I guess I'll keep it very brief because I know we're coming on the 1 o'clock hour, but inviting social workers really just to think about infiltration into systems that are broken, and not to be, and so I use that word infiltration on purpose, just not to be so dismayed by the brokenness that we don't get in there and duke it out and work for change. So even in a community like Washtenaw County, it was astounding to view the disparity year over year over year over year of young people and families struggling, 70 to 80% of whom in the juvenile system are people of color and families and kids of color. Whereas, a wealthy and smart community, and our numbers shouldn't look like that over 20 years time. We should be moving the needle. We should be able to bump things forward. But I guess just a shout out to the folks considering what do you want to do and how do you want to make an impact, and policy macro-minded folks, political office minded folks, get into these systems that are super broken, and let's create revolution from inside. We don't have to do it from the outside, and if you can for as long as you can tolerate that, it can wear you down, but just let's get in there and duke it out.
I'd just like to echo, hi, Lisa. I miss you. So good to hear your voice.
Hi, Felicia, back at you.
Want to echo, what Lisa is saying. Again, witnessing the power of different kinds of voices at the table and having social work voices at the table, it matters. And so for the first time in a long time that I can remember, we have social workers at the county level. We have social workers at the school board level. We have social workers at the township commission level, at the library board level, at the city council level, at the state level. I mean, there are and I don't remember that happening before this election cycle.
Circuit court too, and we got the courts. Circuit court too.
And so circuit court, yes, finally, right? Our circuit court. And I don't know a time that that's happened. So these things are huge. And like we were talking about before, part of what can be even harder in our community, where it's easy to look at all of the things that are going right, and to ignore the very like the reality of what's happening in our community. And it's going to take all of us being able to, I think, work together and work both inside of and outside of the systems to be able to do that. And so I just encourage everyone who's even thinking about it, even if you're not thinking about it, to have conversations with people, and to see how you can get involved. Like Ashley was saying, and it's not just in elected positions. There are so many different leadership positions in these systems to be involved in, and so many ways to show, for our social work values to show up. And so I just want to encourage you, before I have to hop off, for all of you to do that. All of you are welcome to contact me, and I am happy to have conversations with whomever. So I am going to unfortunately have to say goodbye, but want to thank you all
joining us, Felicia,
for letting me be here.
You're amazing. And we'll send your contact information as well to the participants. Thank you.
That sounds great.
You do amazing work.
Have a good one, everyone. Stay safe.
Good one. You too. So, I think Felicia just brought up a really interesting point. Ashley, do you want to add to that? Okay. Just, talking about like systems theory, right? We talk a lot about that in social work, but our ability to really understand that people belong to multi-intersecting complex systems. We know that what goes on in someone's home will affect them in school. We know that what goes on in someone's community at a policy level will impact individuals and families. And it's so important that as social workers, we infiltrate those systems. So speaking of which, sometimes when we talk about these issues, I at least can feel bogged down and overwhelmed, just because of the complexity of them. And we're lucky to have Dr. Katie Richard-Schuster and Amber Williams on with us, who lead the CASC undergraduate minor. And they're going to talk to us a little bit about how do we as social workers go from just this analysis, hearing all the facts, getting bogged down in it. How do we start thinking about change, and what should we be thinking about when we think about action? Hi, Katie.
Hi. I'll get started for a little bit, and then Amber can jump in. And obviously that's an essential question, and also a really big question. I just want to start for a second to talk about the CASC minor, just to make sure that others who are on the call are familiar with it. So the CASC minor, Community Action Social Change minor, is the School of Social Work's undergraduate program. We do not have a BSW program in our school. So CASC is kind of that space. And it was started 10 years ago, actually 10 years ago this year. And Ashley was in the first class. And the goal of the minor was really to be able to bring social work values forward to the undergraduate campus at University of Michigan, and be able to kind of think about how do we engage students in asking critical questions about the communities that they're a part of, thinking about the larger systems issues, as Aisha just said, being able to think about who they are in the process. What does it mean to be a community change agent? How do we understand who we are, what motivates us, how our social identities impact the way we see the world, the way we engage with the world, as well as to give exposure to students who want to start to take action. And so being able to think about how do you get involved, and the different ways that you can get involved, and providing a space for students to kind of pull some of those ideas together and position them, whether they wanted to come to social work. So we have about 25 to 30% of the undergrads come into social work either at our school or another school of social work. But people are also taking these perspectives and ideas forward in lots of different realms, from higher education to business to engineering to art and design to environmental justice work to you name it, and there's kind of CASC perspectives involved in fact we kind of turn the word, the students have turned the word into CASCing, so they'll say where and how am I going to CASC. The minor has grown. We have about 250 students at any one given time from every school and college at the university, over 50 different majors. So it really is this incredible opportunity to bring students together who have a passion for wanting to create change, they have different ideas, they do bring different perspectives, they do bring different issues. But what we're trying to do is provide a set of frameworks, a set of critical ideas, and a set of experiences that they can draw on as they're moving forward. And of course, lots of space to really reflect on it, because, coming from social work, we know it's critical to be able to not just do, but to be able to reflect on what you do and use that reflection and use that critical thinking to be able to move yourself forward. So that's a little bit about the CASC minor, and I'm thrilled that we have Ashley, who was one of the first CASC minors before coming to social work, and then Justin has taught with CASC. And then Felicia is an honorary CASC, so we're really spreading across the panelists. But so back to the question in terms of thinking about action. So I think one of the things that we do in CASC is really try to set up an understanding of these larger systems and structures, and being able to think about who we are in context of this broader community, and then what's underneath those systems and structures. So being able to understand history, being able to understand root causes, being able to ask critical questions, why, how, for whom. Those are pieces that we really think we want to expose students to do, to be asking those questions, to be able to understand themselves relative to their community, and then to step back to be able to see the bigger structure. And so from there, once you can kind of see the system, then it allows you to start to think about where and how you might begin to take action. We do an activity that actually got brought up, if some of you were at the October Engage session around voting rights and voter registration and voter engagement. One of the panelists talked about an activity called Babies in the River, and we do a slightly different version of it called Raining Rocks, but it's the same concept about being able to think about how do you balance acute issues and on the ground issues with larger root causes. And at the end of the activity, it really helps students to understand that you need both to be able to be working. And while we can't all be doing both at the same time, we need to be able to think about how are we joining together in ways that allow us to be able to be working systematically and simultaneously on issues. And so I think kind of one other piece underneath that, and one of the, I think it was Kisa talked about the idea of wicked problems. And again, when we think about the complexity of many of these issues that have been raised in the intersectionality of these issues, it's more than any one of us can do by ourselves. But if we think about it ourselves as working together and recognizing that we can play multiple different roles in multiple different ways, but we have to be able to be understanding the deeper issues in the same way. It allows us to it allows us to think about how our actions can be part of impacting this larger system. One of the pieces in the minor that we talk a lot about is we draw on the work of Grace James and Grace Lee Boggs. And in some of their writings, they talk about the notion of kind of critical connections and the importance of thinking about things in multiple different ways and multiple different layers. That if you only ever think about change happening by one kind of big ball that's going to roll down the hill and kind of wipe out all the problems, we're going to miss so much. And rather, change really happens through small rocks colliding off of one another and being able to kind of cover the ground. And so that's all to say that when we think about action, it really is what we've heard the panelists say, that there's multiple different ways to get involved at multiple different levels. But we need to be able to think about how we are understanding the deeper issues in the same way, and that we are speaking to these larger systematic issues so that we can begin to think about how our individual actions are starting to dismantle, disrupt, interrogate those larger systems. So I think I'll leave it there and ask Amber to jump in at this point.
Yeah, I thought that was beautifully stated in terms of just the work that we do in the minor and the way that we're thinking about action at multiple levels. And something that I would add is that we've been having more conversation about the role and importance of transformative justice, which I hear all embedded in our conversation today, which in part is about addressing root causes and understanding root causes, thinking about history and power, culture, all of these influences that determine sort of our structural reality, and also describing what we mean by critical, that when we talk about being critical and having a critical analysis, that we are talking about power, privilege, and oppression, thinking about the interactions between institutions and the subsequent effects. And so as we talked about today with racial inequity and equity as a whole, if we're talking about housing, for example, we have to honor that we're a part of a carceral state. And so what does that mean when it comes to criminalization? We have to talk about unemployment and wage disparities and how that comes together as we talk about housing and housing access, food access and disparity, that all of these issues are interlocking. And so as an extension of transformative justice, being able to have that conversation with students about what we mean by being critical, not just for the sake of being critical, but having a real understanding about the subsequent effects and how all of these systems work together to create the reality that we are all a part of. And also bringing in the voices of grassroots organizers. So thinking historically about the work and legacy and life of Grace and Jimmy Boggs, but also working with folks like Tawana Petty, working with faculty on our own campus who have done work in community like Stephen Ward and the efforts of Semester in Detroit and otherwise. And so really bringing in those voices to, in a lot of ways, provide a sort of tangible example of what this work really looks like on the ground, and how we can create new possibilities as we, of course, think about the undoing of our social systems. And so just want to add that point there in terms of the role of transformative justice and how we're really bringing that to the forefront, which is also very much about liberation, and understanding the power of individuals and of people, and uprooting these social inequities.
That was amazingly well said, both of you. And CASC sounds like I think it's an amazing initiative. This is a question for all of you. And then we're going to kind of go into just kind of closing thoughts. And it's related to how do you get, especially youth, but really anyone, how do you get them to be invested in these issues? Like, people, I have people in my family who are like, that's great, it doesn't affect me, I don't care. How do we get people to care? What are some tactics that you guys use? Anyone?
I don't know who wants to start first, but I'll just say a word. Kind of two things that I was thinking about. So one is, I think about when you start to think about systems, right? And this is also the work of Tawana Petty and thinking about who are we as humans. When you start to think about systems, we are all part of systems. And so that it really is when we start to see, when you start to see kind of questions about, well, it doesnn't affect me. Well, it affects us because we're all part of the system. So being able to help people see themselves as part of the system, both what they benefit from, where injustice they face, but you can't not be part of the system. And so you can't not be part of working towards justice if you're not understanding that we're all part of and being affected by this system. So I think that's kind of one piece of it. The other thing I would say is that oftentimes we build, when we are working off of the work of the Boggs, they talk about being able to think about what we're for. So not just what we're against, but what we're for. And I think that idea of being able to think about what's the world we're trying to create and how do we begin to move closer towards that, also provides a slightly different framing to encourage people to be part of something, about part of creating something that's anew, that's fighting against what we're the injustices that we're seeing, but being able to imagine something new and help people to think about how they step forward into it.
Yeah, I fully agree with everything that Katie just said. I think, especially from my community organizing days, and I would imagine this would resonate with Justin as a policymaker as well, there is always a way to make an issue resonate with somebody. No matter what that issue is, whether that is through their pocketbook or through their humanity, what they're for or what they're against. It just takes, you have to figure out how to frame whatever that issue is for whoever your audience is, whether that's an individual or other policymakers. I'll be joining the A2I Chamber of Commerce's board this January. And those are all business people, right? And I have to figure out how I make conversations around racial equity and education, relevant to them as business leaders. And again, it's figuring out who your audience is and what will resonate with them.
Yeah, I mean, Ashley's right. That's how I have to look at it too, especially thinking about how do you get people to care about local politics and local policy making. And I mean, the frame is if you care about education, if you care about healthcare, if you care about people being hungry or homeless, you got to care about what's going on at the local level. So figuring out what are the issues that the person you're talking to really cares about and fixing that issue to whatever action needs to be taken, whether it's attending some meeting and making your voice heard because people are considering a policy or engaging with other community groups that are working for change. You got to figure out what is the thing that really speaks to the person and then connect with them on it.
I think it's also a conversation about critical consciousness and critical reflection and deep identity work. And I think at the undergraduate level, that can at times look a little bit different, but something that I value that we do in the minor is around just thinking about who you are first as an individual and all of the identities that you hold, both personal and social, because those can, of course, come together. So how do we explore that? Who are you? What are the communities that you identify with? What have you learned over time? Let's talk about your socialization and the perspectives of your family and of those who are around you, and also the process of undoing around that. And so I think having room to do some of that deep critical reflection work around identity in particular is important and is, of course, a cornerstone of dialogue, recognizing that not all spaces can have the same degree of dialogue in the same way, but I think having room for that. And when it comes to youth in particular, I feel that they're often more ready and prepared to mobilize than we sometimes are. And that in part, it's because, if there are biases or things that they don't understand or ways that resistance may be coming up, they'll speak it and they'll talk to you about it. And they also have a willingness to engage around that. And so how do we activate that and tap into that and also learn from youth about the power of transparency so that we can actually transform and think about our own consciousness as we engage in broader work, whether it's policy or otherwise. And so I think getting back to the roots of identity work and of critical consciousness, and not for the sake of listing out, as I think we can sometimes perpetuate, or here are my privileges and here are the ways in which I'm oppressed. All of that is relevant and important. And also, how do we put that together to think about our relationship to systems and who we are and what we bring?
That's great. And so what I'm hearing all you guys say is something that I've heard over and over again, which I really believe social workers excel at, which is finding out what people's stories are and helping them to understand their own stories, helping them think about how does their own identity, how is their own life connected to systems, right? And then helping people see why they should be invested in an issue and what incentivizes them. Like they say the story of self, us, and now that Marshall Gantz does, which I love, moving from here's a problem to like, this is how it affects all of us, to this is the urgency of action now, today, join me. And I think social workers are especially primed to be able to do that. So, I think this has been an amazing session. I want to thank you all for joining us. Again, we're going to send some information that our panelists shared today in an email to all participants. Before we sign off, I want to ask you guys for any kind of last closing words as we're social workers and we embark on, entering communities and trying to create systemic change. What are things that we should remember? What are things that we should strive for?
I often say that my time at the School of Social Work was the most inspiring time of my life, right? There are people doing really incredible work across a number of different sectors and working with different populations, and everyone is so passionate and amazing. And I think sometimes we forget that it can feel a little like an echo chamber at times too. And when you get out and start doing this work outside of just working with social work colleagues, it can feel a lot different. But know that your perspective, our perspective as social workers, is so sorely needed. The ways that we are living through and working through this pandemic, we see the moments of strength when we're doing this work together and we're really living in and leaning into those social work values of how we're taking care of and listening to our communities and taking care of each other. It's not how our country was designed as a capitalist society. And the ways that we will get through this pandemic better and stronger and more as a community are based in our social work values. So know you belong at the tables outside of this work.
Yeah, I want to echo that. I think one thing that should have become clear to everybody watching this is that social workers are really prepared to do this kind of work, whether it's running for office or engaging in policy and political work in other settings or leadership in other settings. You see from the conversation that we've had today, so much of what we're all doing is really leaning into our social work training. One thing I say in my political social work class or in the certificate program that Aaliyah can talk about is that I think social workers are the best prepared people to be engaged in this kind of work because we get trained in interpersonal practice, we get trained in community organizing and how do we look at systems, how do we manage human services and doing program evaluation. Those are all so many different things that I would want people in leadership positions, whether it's an elected leader or someone else, to have some skill in that. And those are skills that all of you have and are continuing to develop. So never sell yourself short. You belong at the table and you just need to get out there and start now as a student. One thing that I talk about in the political social work class is around the importance of those different appointed positions. And when Felicia was on the call, how she talked about as a commissioner, she serves on the board for food gatherers. Well, there are a bunch of residents that are on those boards and there are a bunch of residents that are on different government boards. And those are all places you could be right now. Aisha's on one too for the city of Ann Arbor. And there's nothing stopping any of you, whether you're a student or not a student, to apply to get on one of those boards. And then you're really at the decision-making table frequently because I know at the county level, because I serve on some of those boards, we make a lot of decisions at Board of Health or Community Action Board, and then it goes up to the commissioners and the work is kind of already done. So then frequently they pass it. If you look at how the county recently declared racism a public health crisis, that started at the Board of Health, where I'm on that board and we're talking with the health department, and then the health department declared it, and then the county commission declared it. And that's just a group of residents. And that's something that all of you could be doing too.
Thank you guys so much. And, you know, we had a question that was chatted to me about, do you guys have any last words about calls to action? Or anything that you can, that we can get, any collective action that we can get involved in as students, as participants on this call?
I think Justin said it, right? Look for those ways to be involved in your community, in our community. We sorely need social work voices all across every sector. And so if you are there to be raising up issues of equity and especially racial equity, that is going to just move the conversation forward. For those of us who are out in the community and doing this work, like I said, sometimes it can feel isolating if you're the only social work voice at the table. So ensuring, you know, reminding us that there are other voices and we're not the only ones is really important to move conversations forward. And then, you know, as especially a largely young population, right, in the School of Social Work, get out and volunteer if you can, because, you know, we saw in the last election that typically poll workers are older volunteers who are retired, and that was not the case. It wasn't safe because of the pandemic. And there's so much work we as schools and our community agencies really need support of young people who are able to do a lot of the work that our older volunteer population hasn't been able to do during this pandemic. So I think, you know, there's a lot of ways to get involved, and I don't think you have to look very hard either.
Yeah, I would say figure out what's on the agenda for a lot of the people that are going to be making decisions. And it's at that point, get a bunch of your friends and attend those meetings to make your voice heard. So if Felicia was still on the call, I would push her to talk about how challenging it was to pass the racial equity ordinance and create the racial equity office for Washtenaw County. It was a heavy lift for her, and she had to push really hard to make that happen. And it's always easier for policymakers to do things like that when they have the meeting and then there's public comment, that there's person after person saying, I support you doing this, I support this happening. And that's one of the things that I think tends to get lost after an election, where the election is over, everybody's like, okay, it's over, I'm done. But that's not how democracy is supposed to work. Like, you have to hold the people that got elected accountable for doing things and continuing to make your voice heard. So Felicia, as an example, mentioned in her upcoming final meeting as county commissioner is going to be pushing a proposal that would make it easier for people to have get access to childcare. That might be a tough sell. So if you care about that, or you care about other issues that might come up, you need to get a bunch of people together and then go to that meeting. It's a lot easier now because everything's on Zoom, and then just say a few words. It's easier now, I think, to be involved in those kinds of decision-making settings, because you can just, I mean, you're already on Zoom all day anyway. You might as well just do one more.
Yeah, it's more accessible. I mean, last night I had a student, that wrote a paper in my class about changing the Human Rights Commission, changing their 180-day complaint process. So people could, even if they suffer from discrimination beyond 180 days, they could still file a complaint. And that student came to the commission meeting last night, did public comment, and the ordinance was changed. That right there is an example of power, right? Trina, I saw you raise your hand.
Yeah, just for an immediate thing right now, on our School of Social Work page, the Michigan Senate is talking about election results, and there's links to make comments to make sure all voices are heard and all votes are counted. And so they don't want public comment, but there's a hashtag to make your own personal comments. So I think that might be something people may want to get involved with today if they are interested.
That's awesome. Thanks so much for sharing that. So we're gonna transition to kind of last reminders, and I want to thank you all so much for joining. This was such a rich conversation. You do amazing work, and we know that the more diverse the group of people in a room, the better the outcomes, the smarter the decisions they make. And I'm really glad that social workers are represented. And I hope you all also find ways to get involved in your communities. All right, Trina, do you want to do some last reminders?
Sure, I can do that. So as I mentioned before, all of our past Engage sessions are available online. I think we're going to put a link in our chat about that if you want to find past sessions and see a reboot of this session if you want to go back and hear parts of it again. Our next virtual conversation is going to be next semester, January 21st. It's going to be in partnership with CASC again about youth organizing and empowerment. So thank you, CASC, for working with us on these great conversations. And there's going to be a link to that put in the chat as well. And then Aisha, I'm going to turn it over to you to talk about how next semester, all of our Engaged sessions will actually be a 1-credit mini course. So why don't you take a second to talk about that?
So we are, we've created a 1-credit mini course, which you would get credit for attending these sessions. Afterward, we're going to have debriefs. We're really going to pull out social work themes, practice, and skills. There'll be a virtual meetup at the start of the series and mid-semester, because it's really also about forming community with your peers, talking about what is the experience you've had in community action and in social change. What are you learning from this series that applies to your work as social workers? And then at the end, you'll write a reflection about how are some of the lessons that you've learned help to shape maybe your plans as a future social worker. So that will be up for you to backpack in December. So just stay tuned on that, but it is being offered and we hope you can join. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for joining. Stay safe.
Absolutely. Bye, everybody. Thanks so much for participating.
Bye, everyone.